Welcome today, ladies and gentlemen. Today we're interviewing Augusto Zimmermann. My name's Darryl Budge. I am the State Director for FamilyVoice in Western Australia. And we want to have a conversation today about many topics. And Professor Augusto Zimmermann is the Head of Law at the Sheridan Institute of Higher Education. And he's agreed to speak to me today about some really important issues regards to faith, family and freedom, which is the mission of FamilyVoice here in Australia. Professor Zimmermann, when I first asked you today, we spoke a bit earlier about the rights and responsibilities here in West Australia in regards to Australia-wide, regards to the vaccine mandates. What's your legal opinion as a Christian and also in your legal opinion about these vaccine mandates?
Well, the situation is really disturbing, I must say, because you see decisions in the past, even by the High Court, making it very clear that when it comes to medical and pharmaceutical treatment, the person has the right to have a conscientious objection. And that is derived from a particular provision in the Constitution, Section 5123, that says that nobody can be subject to what the Constitution refers to civil conscription. The High Court has interpreted this as being something that prevents the government from coercing people to undertake this treatment. But we wouldn't even need to have that provision, because as far as I know, perhaps I got it wrong, but we have a democracy and the rule of law in this country. And certainly these measures are in complete violation of fundamental principles of legality and government under the law. Certainly, nobody should be forced by the state to undertake pharmaceutical medical treatment, and that includes, for obvious reasons, vaccination. So I'm absolutely appalled that the government is undermining such a fundamental right of the citizen. This is almost a declaration of war on our legal system and our legal traditions. What the government is doing is entirely unconstitutional and arbitrary as a result.
So in terms of the legal powers then at the state level, we look at the Constitution and that definitely hinders the operation of the federal government. In regards to rights and legal provisions that the states have, I mean, they have in the Constitution the rights over health and some other matters. And the argument has been put forward that this is a health matter, therefore the states can react in extraordinary ways, very unusual ways, to compel and to conscript people in that way. What is the separation between the federal constitutional and the state?
I like the word that you have used, extraordinary, because it's not really the normal operations of government, the regular operations of a parliamentary government. Most of these decisions are done in disregard of basic principles of the doctrine of separation of powers. What the governments are doing is to undermine ultimately a system of parliamentary democracy and the rule of law in the process, because legal certainty or predictability of the law is one of the most important elements for the realization of the rule of law. So most of these measures are done in a rather arbitrary fashion. Nobody gave chief health advisors the power to be changing rules all the time. It's impossible to live in a peaceful life with tranquility and predict the future with these people changing the rules of the game almost on a single day or almost on a daily basis. So what you have to bear in mind is that these measures are in violation of the idea that the parliament should ultimately make the law and not the executive by means of executive decrees. Perhaps we are now finding out that the system of government is not working as it should be, and potentially it is also the judiciary's fault, because judges should not allow the executive to act in such a manner as to ultimately undermine legal stability and certainty, and as a result, undermining the rule of law in the process.
And we have this principle in Australia of informed consent, that everybody should be informed, and so everybody makes their own individual decision that's not compelled by any particular person. And the principle, of course, of privacy between themselves and their doctor. And we see it's become popular, and I think it's a good term, where we have therapeutic totalitarianism, where it's the sense of the state sees itself as the doctor, as a priest, as any other kind of role that would normally be between you and a person you trust in your community, that you would see as that providing an informed information role. But now we see the government trying to take over almost every area of life. And then the principle of consent, saying you decide, is now the government decides for you. And it's a very socialist environment.
Yeah, absolutely. And I certainly couldn't agree more. And there are two basic aspects of this comment that you have made. One is the fact that informed consent is something that we should expect to be a natural option or right of the individual to undergo these treatments. If you live in a free society, you should have bodily autonomy to make decisions as to whether you should take medicine or not. I think it's not just a matter of Australia's position on the subject, but this is actually what motivated the creation of the Nuremberg Code. That's the code that was created after the atrocities committed by the Nazis, when they actually coerced people to take medical treatment and even experimental vaccines in those days. Nobody can know the ultimate final consequences of this process, because the vaccine has been created a couple of years ago. And according to some of my best friends in the medical profession, the long-term effects of a vaccine can only be seen after 4 or 5 years of the use of the vaccine. So it's utterly irresponsible what the government is doing, and in violation of the right of the individual to make an informed and consensual decision. But that's not something that they are allowing us to do, because they are threatening all these people who have a different position on the subject to have to undergo this treatment at the risk of, if they don't do so, losing their jobs and losing their livelihoods. It is a cruel thing that is to subject people to unnecessary things that they are not willing to have to go through. But another thing I have to say is that this is a result of a form of idolatry of the government. What we have in this country in many ways is as a replacement of the traditional Christian faith and manifestations, you now have this confidence that the government is the ultimate provider, even for life, which is actually quite a dangerous opinion and position, because the government that's good enough to be apparently and supposedly protecting you will be powerful and strong enough to eventually even take the lives of people. So history tells us that we should be very careful about trusting too much in government.
Mm-hmm. The principle of government being that it's limited, and it should only do so far as to protect citizens themselves from direct harm.
Absolutely.
Not the principle of the lots and lots of indirect harms that a person might do themselves, but it has a responsibility to protect each individual from actual measurable harm, not a speculation, not a prophetic speculation about what might happen.
And that's what gives the person a real dignity, because this is the freedom that God has given to us. And it's very important to bear in mind as Christians that the Lord is the Lord that created the law in accordance with James in his scripture is the law of liberty. And in Galatians, we have Paul saying that if God has given you freedom, you must be free indeed, and you have to fight for this. Because all it takes is only one generation to forget about this, and then the rights and freedoms will be under attack and removed from the individual. So what's happening now perhaps reminds me what an Irish politician in the 19th century stated, that the price of freedom is indeed eternal vigilance. So, and that is when we have the opportunity to make choices. God, being a God of freedom, gives us the opportunity to make choices. Nobody can even force him, be forced to love him. It's impossible. But then ultimately, what we have to consider is that if the government becomes all powerful and almighty, then we lose in terms of independence and the capacity to make these decisions in life. And that reduces our sense of self-respect and dignity. And ultimately can even lead to the decrease of compassion and solidarity in society, because there is an intrinsic connection between the rise of the welfare state and big government and the decrease in solidarity and compassion amongst fellow citizens. And it's evident, and many books can prove my point.
Right. Yeah. We have this principle, biblical principle, is that the government's responsibility is to punish the evildoer and reward the good, and has quite a limited set, according to God's word in the New Testament. Yeah.
Not only that, but the Catholics have a good principle, and the Calvinists as well. One is called subsidiarity, and the other is spheres of sovereignty. We should not give to government what we can do by ourselves. And if we are unable to do so, subsidiarity means help or assistance. We should look for instances or spheres of government that are closer to the individual. And the closest of the individual possible sphere of government is actually the family and local government. That is when the power is closer to the individual. The more you give powers to government, the less independent and the less dignity you end up obtaining, because the sense of self-respect, dignity, and autonomy are intrinsically associated with your capacity to make your own decisions in life and to be helped by your own loved ones.
Yeah, the role of government has been expanded greatly, not only to stop the evildoer, but then to mandate that which is supposedly good. What does love your neighbor mean? And one of the principles that's kind of evolved is the idea of common good. That, it's a common good is basically whatever the collective is good for the collective, that's what's common. But the idea of common good is about protecting the person's rights, and it's what's good for that individual in regards to both its responsibilities and its protections from evildoers. And that's the idea of it. To love your neighbor means to get a vaccine, supposedly, and that might be right for the individual, but that idea that is something that must be mandated to all citizens is expanding it from a negative protection to stop the evildoer to now, this is how the government's going to say, this is what love your neighbor means, and it's a positive command.
It's so interesting that they say such a thing, because one of the things they have done over the especially more recent years is to have a total disregard for human life. So it's interesting that these people who now claim to be wanting potentially to save many lives are being directly responsible for the extermination of the unborn, for instance, via abortion on demand. And you have this hypocrisy of governments who are now imposing lockdowns even, that costing the lives of people as well via suicide and depression. But then they have also introduced more recently bills, including this dreadful government in South Australia, that introduces an almost infanticide bill by saying that if the baby somehow survives the abortion, perhaps it's better to complete the job. And then you have that appalling prime minister in New Zealand, actually adopting similar measures, So what is that these people now claim to be saving our lives if they have demonstrated over the years such a disregard for human life? Even these people who created the vaccine are ultimately responsible, some of them, not everyone, by the problem that has been created. Because we know, the New York Times tells us so, and the Washington Post confesses the crime, that the virus was created in the Wuhan labs. The left-wing tabloids also acknowledge this fact. So if these people had the guts to create such an experiment that could cause such a disastrous consequences, I wouldn't trust them to sell us the vaccine. So it's really wishful. It's very naive to believe that the elites really want to protect human life. My experience doesn't confirm this assumption.
Well, thanks for your time, Augusto, today. And it's great to talk about these things, and we'll talk about more things in another episode. Thanks, ladies and gentlemen. We'll see you at another time.